This shack ruins the family image." He laughed, directing the bulldozer. Relatives cheered as walls came down. I sat on the seawall watching quietly. The coastal commission trucks blocked the beach access. Their face went white. The hydraulic arm of the bulldozer swung through the air with mechanical precision, its massive bucket tearing into the weathered wooden frame of my grandmother's beach cottage. Splinters exploded outward like fireworks, catching the late morning sun as they scattered across the sand. The sound was deafening, a combination of splintering wood, groaning metal, and the diesel engine's relentless roar. Finally, my stepfather Marcus announced, his voice carrying over the destruction. He stood 20 feet from the demolition zone, arms crossed over his expensive polo shirt, designer sunglasses reflecting the chaos. "This eyesore has been depreciating the neighboring properties for years." My mother stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm, nodding with what looked like relief. Behind them, at least 15 family members had gathered for what Marcus had called the beach cottage farewell party, though the celebration had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with victory. My Aunt Linda held up her phone, recording the destruction. "Post this to the family group chat," she called out. "Everyone needs to see this moment." Uncle Raymond popped a bottle of champagne, the cork sailing toward the ocean. "To progress," he shouted, and the family echoed his toast. I sat on the concrete seawall 50 yards away, my legs dangling toward the rocky beach below. The salt air was thick with humidity, mixing with the dust cloud rising from the demolition. My phone sat in my lap, screen dark, notifications silenced. I'd worn my oldest jeans and a faded Stanford t-shirt, the one from my undergraduate days that Marcus always said made me look like a beach bum. The bulldozer operator, a man named Terry, who'd apparently been hired through Marcus's construction contacts, seemed uncomfortable with the enthusiasm of his audience. He kept glancing toward Marcus for confirmation before each swing of the bucket. The cottage's front porch collapsed entirely, the railing where I'd spent countless summer evenings reading splitting into pieces. "You know what the best part is," Marcus called out loud enough for me to hear even from the seawall. "The property value for the entire street is going to jump 30% once this is gone. The neighbors have been thanking me all week." My cousin Derek, who'd always competed with me growing up, walked closer to where I sat. "You're taking this pretty well," he said, his tone suggesting disappointment that I wasn't crying or protesting. "I thought you'd put up more of a fight." I looked up at him, squinting against the sun. "Would it matter?" "Probably not." He shrugged. "Marcus has the family lawyer on speed dial. And honestly, this place was falling apart anyway. You haven't even visited in 3 years? 2 years and 4 months, I said quietly. Derek laughed. "Exactly. You abandoned it. Marcus is doing everyone a favor, especially you. You'll get your share when he develops the lot properly." The eastern wall came down next, revealing the small kitchen where my grandmother had taught me to make her famous blueberry pancakes. The vintage stove, the one she'd insisted on keeping despite its inefficiency, toppled sideways and crashed through what remained of the floor. My mother approached, her heels sinking slightly into the sand. She dressed for the occasion in white linen pants and a coral blouse, beach casual that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice taking on that careful tone she used when she wanted to appear maternal without actually engaging with conflict. "Why don't you come join us? There's champagne and Marcus ordered lunch from that seafood place you used to like." "I'm fine here," I said. She sighed. "You're being dramatic. This cottage has needed major work for years. The foundation is cracked. There's water damage throughout, and the electrical system is a fire hazard." Marcus had 3 different contractors look at it. The repair costs would exceed the structure's value. "Did he have permits?" I asked. My mother's expression flickered with irritation. "The permits are being processed. Marcus has connections with the city planning office. These things are just formalities when you know the right people." "Formalities," I repeated. "Yes. And honestly, the cottage should have been torn down after your grandmother passed. Keeping it was pure sentimentality. And you know how your grandmother felt about making impractical decisions based on emotion." She touched my shoulder briefly. "This is for the best. You'll see." She walked back to Marcus, who immediately put his arm around her waist and kissed her temple, a display of unity, showing everyone that they were a team and I was the outlier. The back wall fell, and with it went the sleeping porch where I'd spent every summer night from age 7 to 17, listening to the waves, and reading by flashlight long after bedtime. The screens that had kept out mosquitoes while letting in the ocean breeze scattered like confetti. My Aunt Linda posted something on her phone, then laughed at the responses. "Everyone's so relieved," she announced. "The neighborhood association has been complaining about this cottage for years. It was an eyesore." My Uncle Raymond agreed, pouring more champagne, bringing down everyone's property values. "Marcus is a hero for finally dealing with it." I checked my phone. The screen showed 11:04 a.m., right on schedule. Marcus walked toward the bulldozer operator, gesturing animatedly. Even from this distance, I could read his body language. Aggressive confidence. The stance of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. He pointed toward the cottage's foundation, clearly giving instructions for the final phase of demolition. My cousin Jessica, Derek's younger sister, wandered over to the seawall. Unlike the rest of the family, she looked uncomfortable with the celebration. "I know you loved this place," she said quietly, sitting down a few feet away from me. "I'm sorry it came to this." "Are you?" I asked. Not unkindly. She flushed. "I tried to talk to my dad about it, but he said Marcus has legal authority since your mom inherited everything from your grandmother and they're married. Community property laws are something." "Community property," I said. "That's the California standard, right?" Jessica pulled her knees up to her chest. "For what it's worth, I don't think this is fair. You spent every summer here. This was your place." The foundation groaned as the bulldozer's bucket struck it. Concrete cracked, revealing the rebar skeleton beneath. Marcus applauded. "Question," I said, still watching the destruction. "Did Marcus happen to mention what he's planning to build here?" Jessica nodded. "He's been talking about it for months. A modern beach house, 4 bedrooms, rooftop deck, floor-to-ceiling windows. He already has an architect working on designs. He showed everyone the renderings last week. Didn't you see them?" "I wasn't invited to that meeting." "Oh." Jessica looked down at her hands. "Well, it's supposed to be really nice. Contemporary design. He's calling it an investment property. Plans to rent it out when the family isn't using it." "An investment property," I repeated. "The cottage is chimney, built from local stone by my great-grandfather in 1952, swayed, and then collapsed inward. Dust billowed up, and the family cheered again." My phone buzzed. A text message appeared. 5 minutes out. "Are they still proceeding?" I typed back. "Yes, full demolition in progress." Perfect timing, came the response. I stood up from the seawall, brushing sand from my jeans. The movement caught Marcus's attention. He turned, saw me standing, and his expression shifted to something triumphant. "Finally giving up your vigil," he called out. "Come have some champagne. We're celebrating progress." I walked toward the family gathering, my steps steady on the uneven sand. As I got closer, I could see the details I'd been too far away to notice. The satisfaction on Marcus's face, the relief on my mother's, the vindication on my aunt and uncle's expressions. "There she is," Marcus said, gesturing toward me with his champagne flute. "The cottage's last offender, come to make peace with reality." "Something like that," I said. The bulldozer's engine idled as Terry waited for instructions. The cottage was nearly gone now, just portions of the foundation, and scattered debris marked where it had stood for 73 years. Marcus turned to address the gathered family. "I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I know some of you thought I was being too aggressive about this, but sometimes tough decisions need to be made for the good of the family. This property has been a burden long enough." My mother nodded along with his speech. "Marcus has worked so hard to handle this properly," she added. "Dealing with contractors, navigating city regulations, managing the logistics. We're lucky to have someone so capable in the family. The new house is going to be spectacular," Aunt Linda chimed in. "I've already called dibs on the master suite for next summer. Actually, Uncle Raymond said Marcus mentioned rotating the rental income among family members. Will all benefit financially?" I listened to them discuss the property's future, dividing up benefits from something that no longer existed. No one was looking at me anymore. I'd become irrelevant to their celebration. The sound of engines approaching made everyone turn. 3 white trucks with official seals on the doors pulled up to the beach access road, blocking the exit. The lead vehicle had California Coastal Commission emblazoned across the side. Behind it, a truck from the county building department. The third displayed the logo of the State Environmental Protection Agency. Marcus's expression shifted from triumph to confusion. "What's this about?" 5 people emerged from the vehicles. 4 men and 1 woman, all carrying tablets and official-looking clipboards. They wore identification badges and moved with the purposeful efficiency of government inspectors who'd done this before. The woman in front, a tall black woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair, approached the demolition site. Her badge identified her as Sandra Mitchell, Senior Enforcement Officer, California Coastal Commission. "Who's in charge of this demolition?" She called out, her voice cutting through the diesel engine noise. Marcus stepped forward immediately, his businessman confidence returning. "I am Marcus Whitmore, and I don't appreciate this interruption. We have all the proper authorizations." "Do you?" Sandra pulled out her tablet, swiping through screens. "I'm going to need to see your coastal development permit, your demolition permit, your environmental impact assessment, and your historical preservation clearance." Marcus's face flushed. "The permits are being connections don't supersede California Coastal Act requirements," Sandra interrupted. "This property sits within the coastal zone, which means any demolition requires specific permits that take into account environmental impact, public access, and historical significance." One of the men from the building department approached the bulldozer operator. "Sir, I'm going to need you to shut down your equipment immediately. This is an unpermitted demolition in progress." Terry killed the engine without hesitation, clearly relieved to step away from the situation. My mother moved closer to Marcus. "There must be some mistake. My husband has been working with the city for months on this project." "Working with city planning doesn't grant coastal commission approval," another inspector said, examining the demolished cottage remains with a tablet camera. "These are separate jurisdictions with separate requirements." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my attorney right now. This is harassment." "You're welcome to call anyone you'd like," Sandra said calmly. "But this demolition is ceased as of this moment, and we'll be conducting a full investigation into violations of the Coastal Act, potential destruction of historical resources, and illegal construction activity." My Aunt Linda's voice had lost its celebration. Historical resources. It was just an old cottage. The environmental protection inspector, a young Asian man with glasses, looked up from his tablet. "Actually, this structure was built in 1952 by Samuel Harrison Chen, a notable architect who designed several significant examples of mid-century California beach cottages. This particular building has been under consideration for historical landmark status for the past 18 months. The family went quiet. I could see them processing this information, trying to understand how their certain victory had suddenly transformed into something else entirely. Sandra turned to the gathered crowd. "I'm going to need to speak with the property owner. Who holds the deed to this land?" Marcus stepped forward again. "My wife inherited this property from her mother. As her husband, I have legal authority. I need to speak with the deed holder." Sandra interrupted. "Not someone claiming spousal authority." My mother looked flustered. "Well, technically my mother left the property in a trust, but Marcus has been managing." "Who is the trustee?" Sandra asked. The family members were all looking at each other now, uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. Marcus's jaw was clenched, his phone still in his hand. I raised my hand slightly. "I am." Everyone turned to look at me. Marcus's expression went from confused to angry in seconds. "That's ridiculous," he said. "Your mother inherited everything from your grandmother. My grandmother established an irrevocable trust 3 months before she passed away," I said, keeping my voice level. "The beach cottage property was transferred into that trust with specific terms. My mother received the house in Pacific Heights and the investment portfolio. I received the beach cottage and the responsibility of maintaining it according to the trust's environmental and historical preservation requirements." My mother's face had gone pale. "That's not you never said." I mentioned the trust at the reading of the will. I said, "You were focused on the Pacific Heights property and the investment accounts. The cottage was listed separately in the documentation. You signed acknowledgement of the trust terms." Marcus took a step toward me. "If that were true, you would have stopped this demolition before it started." I met his eyes. "I tried 11 times. I sent emails to you, to Mom, to the family attorney. I explained the trust terms, the coastal commission requirements, the historical significance evaluation that was pending. I requested that you pause any demolition plans until proper permits could be obtained. I never received any emails, Marcus said. I have the sent receipts, the read confirmations, and your responses. I said, including the one from 3 weeks ago where you called me a sentimental child, trying to block progress, and said you'd proceed regardless of my objections. Sandra was typing notes into her tablet. So you're the legal property owner, and you explicitly denied permission for this demolition. Yes, I said. I'm the sole trustee and beneficiary of the Chen Family Coastal Trust. This property cannot be sold, demolished, or substantially altered without approval from both the trust terms and the California Coastal Commission. My grandmother was very specific about preservation requirements. The building inspector photographed the demolition debris. This is going to be a significant violation. Unauthorized demolition of a structure under historical review, Coastal Act violations, environmental impact violations. Now wait just a minute, Uncle Raymond interjected. Marcus was acting in good faith. He thought he had authority through his wife. Ignorance of property ownership doesn't excuse Coastal Act violations, Sandra said, and according to what we're hearing, he was explicitly notified of the ownership structure and proceeded anyway. Marcus's face had gone red. This is absurd. I invested thousands of dollars in planning this project. I hired contractors, paid for architectural designs, coordinated with the entire family. Without obtaining the actual property owner's consent or required permits, Sandra finished, which brings us to the current situation. Miss Chen, I'm going to need you to provide documentation of the trust, proof of ownership, and all communications you've had regarding this property. I have everything in my car, I said, including the historical significance application I submitted to the State Preservation Board 18 months ago, the environmental impact assessment I commissioned, and the coastal development permit application I filed 6 months ago for minor repairs to the existing structure. My mother found her voice. Why didn't you tell us you were doing all this? I did tell you, I said. You didn't listen. You were too focused on Marcus's plans to pay attention to the legal reality of who actually owned the property. Derek stared at me. You set this up. You let Marcus demolish the cottage knowing this would happen. I tried to stop him legally. I said, I sent certified letters. I contacted the family attorney. I filed formal objections. Marcus proceeded anyway, and you all supported him because you assumed he knew what he was doing. The environmental inspector was examining the foundation damage. We're going to need to assess the environmental impact of this demolition. Any hazardous materials impact to the beach ecosystem. Disruption to protected dunes. Sandra turned to Marcus. Mr. Whitmore, we're going to need you to provide all documentation related to this demolition. Contracts, planning documents, any permits you believe you obtained. The California Coastal Commission will be opening a full investigation, and violations of this nature typically result in significant fines, mandatory restoration requirements, and potential criminal charges depending on the severity. Criminal charges? My mother's voice was faint. Knowingly demolishing a structure in the coastal zone without proper permits, especially one under historical review, can constitute a misdemeanor under California law. Sandra explained. The fines can reach hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the violator is typically required to restore the property to its original condition at their own expense. Marcus's phone slipped from his hand, landing in the sand. Restore it. The cottage is destroyed. How am I supposed to? That's going to be your responsibility to figure out. Sandra said. We have extensive documentation of the original structure. Restoration will need to match historical specifications. Use period-appropriate materials and receive Coastal Commission approval at every stage. Aunt Linda looked like she might be sick, but Marcus doesn't have that kind of money. He leveraged his business to finance the new house plans. The building department inspector added, the county will also be issuing violations for unpermitted demolition, illegal disposal of construction materials, and operating heavy equipment without proper authorization. Those are separate from the Coastal Commission penalties. I walked toward my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic parked near the beach access road. From the trunk, I retrieved a leather portfolio containing copies of all the trust documents, the historical significance application, the environmental studies, and 18 months of correspondence attempting to prevent exactly this situation. Sandra reviewed the documents quickly, her expression professional. Everything appears to be in order. Miss Chen, you'll need to work with our office on next steps. Given that the demolition has already occurred, we'll need to discuss restoration requirements and environmental remediation. I understand, I said. I have a contractor on standby who specializes in historical restorations and is familiar with Coastal Commission requirements. I've also been in contact with the State Historical Society about documentation of the original construction. Marcus stared at me. You planned this. You wanted the cottage destroyed so I could what? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd allowed it to be all morning. Watch my grandmother's legacy get torn down, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on restoration, deal with months of investigations and permits. This is exactly what I tried to prevent, but you were so certain of your authority, so convinced that you knew better, that you ignored every warning, every legal notification, every attempt I made to stop this. My mother was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Sweetheart, I didn't know. I thought Marcus was handling everything properly. You didn't know because you didn't ask. I said, you assumed. You assumed Marcus had authority. You assumed I was being difficult. You assumed the cottage was worthless. You never actually verified any of it. The family stood in a loose cluster, champagne bottles forgotten in the sand, their celebration transformed into something else entirely. Derek had gone pale. Aunt Linda was frantically texting someone. Uncle Raymond kept looking at the demolished cottage as if seeing it for the first time. Sandra finished documenting the scene with her tablet. Mr. Whitmore, you'll be receiving official notification of violations within 5 business days. The fines for Coastal Act violations start at $50,000 and increase based on the severity and extent of damage. Given that this involved a structure under historical review, I anticipate the penalties will be substantial. I want to speak with your supervisor, Marcus said, his voice strained. You're welcome to contact our office, Sandra replied. But I should inform you that this case is fairly straightforward. Unpermitted demolition in a coastal zone of a historically significant structure conducted despite explicit objections from the legal property owner. There's not much ambiguity here. The building department inspector handed Marcus a citation. This is for the county violations. You'll need to appear at a hearing within 30 days. Bring your attorney. Jessica was the only family member who approached me as the inspectors continued their documentation. I'm sorry, she said quietly. We should have listened to you. Yes, I said. You should have. What happens now? I looked at the demolished cottage at the pile of timber and stone that used to be my summer sanctuary. Now I rebuild it properly. With all the right permits, using the historical documentation I've spent 18 months compiling. It'll take about a year and cost roughly $400,000. $400,000. Jessica's eyes widened. Do you have that kind of money? The trust does, I said. My grandmother wasn't just sentimental about the cottage. She invested in coastal California real estate throughout her life. The trust holds 3 other properties that generate rental income specifically earmarked for maintaining the beach cottage. She knew someone might try to demolish it someday. She made sure I'd have the resources to rebuild if necessary. The third inspector, who'd been examining the beach access road, approached Sandra. We've got additional violations. The demolition equipment damaged protected dune vegetation, and there's construction debris in the high tide zone. Environmental remediation is going to be required. Sandra nodded, adding notes to her tablet. She turned to me. Miss Chen, once we complete our investigation, we'll coordinate with you on restoration requirements. Given your cooperation and the documentation you've provided, the Commission will work with you as the victim of this violation rather than a participant. Thank you, I said. Marcus had his phone out again, apparently calling his attorney. My mother stood alone, watching the inspector's work. Her celebration outfit now seeming absurd against the reality of the situation. The bulldozer operator, Terry, approached Sandra. Ma'am, I need to clarify something. I was hired through a contractor service. I was told all permits were in place. I had no idea this was unauthorized. We'll need a statement from you, Sandra said, but operators hired through legitimate contractor services typically aren't held liable. If they were provided false information about permits, we'll verify your story. Terry looked relieved. I have all the paperwork from the job order. It showed city planning authorization. I checked before I started. That'll be helpful for our investigation, Sandra said. The family began to disperse slowly. The celebration thoroughly ended. Derek and Jessica walked toward their car without saying goodbye. Aunt Linda and Uncle Raymond followed. Linda still on her phone, probably spreading news of the disaster to relatives who hadn't attended. My mother approached me, her steps hesitant. "Can we talk? About what?" I asked. "About fixing this. About working together too." "Ma'am, there's nothing to fix between us," I said. "You made your choice. You chose Marcus's version of progress over preserving Grandma's legacy. You chose convenience over verification. You chose to ignore my communications and proceed with demolition despite my explicit objections. But I didn't understand." "You didn't want to understand," I interrupted. "Understanding would have required effort. It would have meant questioning Marcus, reviewing the trust documents, acknowledging that maybe, possibly I knew what I was talking about. That was too much work, so you assumed I was wrong, and he was right." Tears continued down her face. "I'm still your mother." "Yes," I said. "And Grandma was your mother. But you're letting Marcus destroy what she built while I'm the one fighting to preserve it. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities." Marcus had finished his phone call and was storming toward his Mercedes. My mother looked between us, torn, then followed him. They drove away without another word, leaving deep tire tracks in the sand. Sandra approached me as the other inspectors continued their documentation. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, she said. "I've never seen someone handle a situation like this with such composure. My grandmother taught me that emotion without strategy is just noise," I said. "She wanted me to protect this place, so I learned everything I needed to know. Coastal law, historical preservation, environmental protection, trust management. I spent 2 years preparing for the possibility that someone might try exactly what Marcus did today." "Your grandmother raised you well," Sandra said. I looked at the demolished cottage at the foundation and scattered debris. "She raised me to value things that last," I said, "and to be willing to fight for them, even when it's hard." The inspectors completed their initial documentation and prepared to leave. Sandra handed me her card. "Contact our office Monday morning. We'll start the restoration coordination process, and Miss Chen. For what it's worth, I think your grandmother would be proud of how you handled this." The trucks drove away, leaving me alone on the beach with the ruins of the cottage and the sound of waves. My phone buzzed with messages, family members wanting explanations, Marcus's attorney requesting meetings, contractors confirming availability for restoration work. I sat back down on the sea wall, watching the afternoon sun glint off the ocean. The cottage was gone, demolished by arrogance and assumption, but it would return, rebuilt according to my grandmother's vision, protected by laws and trusts and documentation that Marcus had been too confident to respect. The tide was coming in, waves reaching higher up the sand with each cycle. In a year, maybe less, the cottage would stand here again. And this time, everyone would know exactly who it belonged to, and exactly what it would cost to ignore the law. My phone buzzed again, a text from my grandmother's estate attorney. "Heard what happened, trust provisions activated as planned. Call me Monday to discuss next steps." I typed back, "Will do. Thanks for the preparation." The sun was setting now, painting the demolished cottage debris in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the pile of timber and stone were 73 years of family history, of summer evenings and blueberry pancakes, of my grandmother's careful planning, and my promise to preserve what she'd built. Marcus had demolished a cottage, I would rebuild a legacy, and he would pay for every mistake he'd made in assuming he had the right.